Death at Rottingdean, Chapter 23. Kipling suspected it. Ezra Pound, The Cantors. Not 20 paces away, a significant dog fox sat on his haunches and looked at the children as though he were an old friend of theirs. "Oh, Mus Reynolds, said Hobden under his breath. "If I knowed all that was inside your head, I'd know something worth knowing. Mus Dan and Miss Una come along with me while I lock up me little hen house." Rudyard Kipling, Puck of Pook's Hill. Kate walked swiftly down High Street toward the Gap, glancing into every green byway and peering into every windowed shop, the chemist, the tobacconist, the grocery, the alehouse, the post office. Lawrence had reported that Charles had 1 or 2 important errands and would be home by tea time. But tea time had come and gone, and Kate felt her information could not wait on his return. She had put on her jacket, pinned on her hat, and walked out into the bright, clear afternoon looking for him. The village street was busy, but once again it seemed to Kate that there was something sinister about its activity. A hatless gypsy woman with long black hair and carrying a woven basket of rabbits turned surreptitiously and slipped into a lane. A ruddy-cheeked man with a scythe over his shoulder stepped into the gutter so she could pass, averting his eyes from hers and muttering something she could not completely catch. A cluster of men on the corner turned their backs as she walked by, as if they did not want her to see their faces. Kate felt a shiver of apprehension. With its perfection of whitewashed slate-roof houses, its quaintly cobbled streets, its green gardens and golden downs and wide views of the sparkling sun-ruffled sea, Rottingdean was just as lovely as it had seemed the day she and Charles arrived. But now, under the picture-book loveliness, Kate felt something dark and sombre, brooding. "Its soul is rotten right through," the young widow had cried, and Kate shivered once again as she realized that Rod, who had not even heard the woman's story, suspected it. "Laces for a lady, letters for a spy," he had written. "Watch the wall, my darling, while the gentlemen go by." How many men, women, and children in this village had turned away from the truth, closing their eyes and ears to a venture that turned honest men into something else altogether. Kate! Kate started. In front of her, turning the corner from Newhaven Road, was Charles. In her haste, she had all but collided with him. "Charles," she said, clutching at his arms, "I've been looking for you. There is something you need to know, several things, in fact, and they are all important. Is there somewhere we can talk privately?" A few minutes later, Charles was having procured a glass of sherry for each of them. They were seated at a table in the large tap room in the White Horse Inn, with its curious carvings and half-panelled walls. From the evidence of the painted wooden sign that hung above the wainscoting, the inn must have once been an important coaching station. One sign with the date of 1808 announced a new coach called the Royal Charlotte, which would make the 40-mile journey between Brighton and Hastings in 10 hours. Another trumpeted the opening of the former road in 1822, the new coach road that linked Rottingdean to the county town of Lewes. Kate wondered fleetingly how much smuggled contraband, how many clandestine communications had been carried by those coaches. Charles listened thoughtfully to her story, frowning at the widow Radford's bitter accusation of Captain Smith, smiling a little when Kate told her about a conversation with Miss Portney, and shaking his head over the tale of the chantilly and Valenciennes lace that she had ordered from the dressmaker. "And here," Kate said, drawing a tobacco tin out of her handbag, "is a little present I purchased for you, my dear. I hope you enjoy it, for it is very good. Or so the tobacconist assured me." She smiled, remembering Kipling's verse, "Brandy for the parson, tobacco for the clerk." Charles took the tin, opened and sniffed it. "So it is," he said admiringly, turning a pinch between his fingers. "A very fine Turkish tobacco, which I should rather have expected to find in one of the best shops in London. Thank you very much, Kate. Your resourcefulness never fails to amaze me." He began filling his pipe. "But what's this about a parson and a clerk?" "It's a poem Rod sent me this afternoon," she said. "It's called A Smuggler's Song." She drew it out of her handbag and read the first verse. 25 ponies trotting through the dark, brandy for the parson, baccy for the clerk. Laces for a lady, letters for a spy, and watch the wall, my darling, while the gentlemen go by." Charles said, striking a match and touching it to his stamped tobacco. He drew appreciatively. "Yes, fine. Of course it's fine, but listen to this verse, Charles. It's even finer. Rod has it exactly right. If you do as you've been told, likely there's a chance you'll be give a dainty doll all the way from France, with a cap of Valenciennes and a velvet hood, a present from the gentleman, a long being good. You see, she said excitedly, everyone in this village is either involved or knows what's going on, but they've closed their eyes and kept their mouth shut because they're benefiting from it. Ah, Charles said, as a wreath of smoke curled over his head. Don't me, Charles Sheridan, Kate leaned closer, frowning, and don't tell me I'm imagining things either. I'm certain that George Radford was killed because he threatened to reveal what was going on. In fact, he may have even been killed by Captain Smith, who was the leader of the smugglers. She put a finger on Charles's chest, tapping for emphasis. This is not a poet's fancy or one of Bill Bartlett's inventions. This is the truth. You're very likely right, Katie, Charles said. He clasped her hand and closed his eyes meditatively. By Jove, this is a very fine tobacco. She pulled her hand back, surprised. I'm right? He opened his eyes again. The evidence you have assembled fits the story that has emerged so far from my own investigations. He raised his glass of sherry and sipped it. This is a very fine sherry as well, he said, leaning back. Don't you think so? Charles, Kate exclaimed impatiently, tell me about your investigations. What have you learned? I will tell you later, my dear, Charles said and smiled, but we have a small matter to attend to first. A social call, as it were, although our host will not be at home. Drink up. He lifted his glass to hers. Charles's small matter turned out to be a search of the cottage just off of High Street in which Captain Smith had lived. Kate was nervous as they stood before the closed door as if they were about to call on the occupant of the building. She felt only slightly reassured by the fact that Charles had a key, obtained when the late captain's personal effects were surrendered to him. She knew that the man whose house this was could not come upon them, but that did not keep her from feeling that he was watching behind the rose bush or on the other side of the door. She felt rather better once they were safely inside the empty cottage and the door shut and latched against any challenge. Well, Charles remarked, looking around, I shouldn't think a search would take very long. There isn't much here to search through. The cottage was a single large room with a wooden floor, heavy beams supporting a low ceiling, and a fireplace of laid-up stone. A narrow bed stood against one wall, a trunk at its foot. A wooden sink and cupboard arrangement ran under a casement window on a second wall, and a table and chair stood against a third. A stuffed chair sat before the cold fireplace, which contained a small black kitchen range that had not been cleaned recently. One corner of the room was curtained off as a closet, and in another stood a wooden cupboard of books. The room was spare and tidy, the only decorations of a wall-hung gold-framed photograph of a dark-haired woman in the hoop skirts of 30 years before, signed to Reynold from his loving mother. Beside it, in a matching frame, hung a photograph of a smiling man in a Coast Guard uniform. The man Kate had seen, dead in the old mill. His eyes, bright and curious, seemed to follow her as she moved, as if he were about to ask what they had wanted from him. There was a paraffin lamp on the table, but the sun through the window brightened the room enough. Charles made the desk, instructing Kate to look through the trunk and the closet, and the next few minutes passed in silence, the only sound of the twitter of a robin outside the window. Kate, still feeling the dead man's eyes on her, took the photograph from the wall and laid it face down on the bed, then began with the closet. She found nothing remarkable there. A thick blue overcoat, a woolen uniform jacket with gold buttons and braid, a tweed shooting jacket, a pair of tweed trousers, and boots. She went through all the pockets, discovering nothing but a wrapped peppermint candy and a telegram still folded in its yellow envelope, which she glanced at and put on the table for Charles to read. She opened the trunk and lifted out neat stacks of clothing, woolen trousers, a uniform jacket, folded shirts, cotton stockings, finding nothing of any interest. Quickly she searched the bed, lifting the thin mattress and peering beneath it. Then she straightened and went to the wooden sink. A mug filled with assorted knives, forks, and spoons caught her eye, for one of the knives was quite unusual. It looked like a small sword, actually, the hilt. She looked at it closely and gasped. Charles, I think there's blood on this knife, and here are initials, G.R. It was indeed blood, and after a moment's study, Charles spoke grimly. Well done, Kate. I think you have found the weapon that killed Radford. His own knife. He shook his head. I'm not sure I should have thought to look for it here among the kitchen utensils. Then you knew it was here. Kate cast a glance at the wicked knife and shuddered, thinking of the family that it had ripped apart. I thought it might be, if Smith had killed him, and I believe he did. If we question the boy closely, we may find that he recognized the captain taking the body out to sea. They held up the telegram. "You found this in a pocket." "Yes. Is it important?" Charles handed it. "What do you think?" "Meet at High Point 4 p.m. signed Willie." She read slowly and shook her head. "I don't know, Charles." She handed back the telegram. "The only Willie I can think of is the Kaiser, but I hardly imagine a Coast Guard captain would be receiving telegrams from heads of state. What else have you found?" "These were in the ledger in the cupboard," Charles replied, indicating several items he laid out on the table. "When I have time to study the ledger, it may also prove useful." Kate bent over a sketch crudely drawn freehand in pencil on a torn and wrinkled scrap of brown paper. "It's a map of Rottingdean. Look, Charles, at these little squares. They are houses. There's a pond on the green, and that little square is the Elms, and that one is North End House. This heavy line has to be High Street, and this dotted line—" Her mouth went dry. Charles finished the sentence for her. "The dotted line must represent the tunnel." She stared at him. "Charles, we've solved the mystery. This is proof that Captain Smith was involved with the smugglers." "Not necessarily," Charles said cautiously. "He might have been investigating their activities. But that doesn't account for George Radford's knife. Someone might have put it there with the intention of incriminating Foxy Smith." Kate frowned. "You can't really think." "No, I believe Smith killed Radford to keep the smuggling operation from being discovered. But we can't rule out other possibilities, Kate. After all, we can't get into Smith's head and find out what he knew, and we don't have any evidence that Radford was killed to keep him quiet. And there are still several puzzles. For instance, look at these." He pointed to 2 sheets of onion skin paper covered with penciled compass bearings, lines, and arcs. "What are they?" "Map overlays. They're used in the army, where one can't forever be annotating one's map with the latest tactical information. These appear to match an in-scale ordnance survey map." "Which map? A map of what area?" Charles shook his head. "I can't tell. The registration marks aren't designated by coordinates." "They won't be of much use then," Kate, thinking the sketch of the tunnel was far more interesting than sheets of onion skin that might or might not tell them anything. Went back to the drawing. She put her finger on one of the squares. "You know, I believe this is Seabrook House, Charles. And look, the tunnel is right there, just behind the house." Charles was still studying the overlays. "I might be able to guess the area if I could find the appropriate ordnance survey sheet." He paused. "What's puzzling me, though, isn't the what, but the why. I'd use a map overlay to plan something dynamic, an invasion perhaps, not a simple smuggling operation." He frowned. "And then there's that gun. Yes, the gun," he muttered, more to himself than to her. Kate looked up. "The gun? You found the gun that killed Captain Smith?" Charles began gathering up the overlays and sketch and putting them into the ledger. "Not yet, but we will, Kate, we will. It's just a matter of time." He wrapped the knife in a clean cotton cloth and gathered everything up, then looked at her grim-faced. "And while we may not be able to get inside Foxy Smith's head and learn all that he knew, what we found in this room tells us something very much worth knowing." His mouth relaxed into a smile, and he put his arm around Kate's shoulder. "Let's go back to Seabrook House, shall we? We can talk there, and now that Foxy is no longer around to tell the chickens what to do, perhaps we can unlock the hen house." Kate frowned. "I don't think I understand that." "I'm not sure I do either, Kate, at least not all of it, but guessing is better than closing our eyes or watching the wall, isn't it?"